Welcome to Rewired Sober, the podcast that tells the truth about why women drink and what it actually takes to stop. Spoiler alert, it's not a character flaw. It's your conditioning and the roles you were handed long before you ever picked up a drink. I'm your host, Kate Vitella. I have been an RN for well over 2 decades. I'm addiction trained, a psychiatric nurse, and a sobriety coach. And this is where we do science and soul work of a woman's recovery. So you can stop white knuckling this shit and actually start trusting yourself. I am a raging feminist, a fashion lover, and I swear a lot. So if that's for you, buckle up, let's go. Okay, welcome back, Sober Lovelies. It's a solo episode, just me, Kate, today. Today's episode is for the spouse, the parent, the adult child, the best friend, coworker, honestly, anyone who is watching someone they care about drink in a way that concerns them. Because one of the questions I get asked often as a recovery coach and as a nurse is, how do I help someone who's drinking too much or I think is drinking or loves it too much, right? How do I help someone that's going down that road? Now, the frustrating answer is it depends. This is not cut and dry. Every family situation, every relationship is different, right? And the advice I would give to a wife whose partner drinks every night may be different than what I would tell the parent of an 18-year-old or of an adult daughter worried about their aging parent or someone whose partner has become emotionally abusive. There's no universal script here. I wish there was magic sentences that I could say because this is going to be one of the hardest things you'll ever go through. And there's really no perfect intervention here. It's nuanced. But what I can share are some principles I've learned as a psychiatric nurse, addiction trained, as a coach, and someone who used to be the woman that everyone worried about was drinking too much. Now, parents of teenagers have a particularly tough situation that holds a different weight. They are vulnerable adults, young people. I honestly can't sit back and say I would know the right way to approach this because being a mama bear and protecting your child is going to be instinctually and come before anyone's good advice. I'm just giving you some principles I've learned along the way. And I know when I've talked to my partner, my husband, who's gone through this with me and my mom had to go through this and her daughter, me, I was 36 years old. I was 38 by the time I got sober. So she struggled with me for about 2 years of just the worst. And I can't take that time back that I did that to her. I feel horrible about that because to this day, my mom, my grandma, and my husband will say it is the scariest thing they've ever been through. And my husband is a 20-year Army veteran. They will say it is the scariest thing they've ever seen to watch someone they love go through addiction. So I'm going to just normalize right here that this is hard. It's all emotionally messy. And it's scary and complicated, but I think it's worth talking about. And I'm mostly going to be talking about the perspective of adults, one adult to another, not so much with a teen situation, because I do not pretend to be an expert on teens with drug and alcohol addiction. I think that's a conversation that needs to go elsewhere. I am a pretty good expert on adulting, though, at this point with when it comes to addiction, because that's the population I've served and the population I've been a part of. Okay, caveats aside, lots of hard truths coming at you here, but the first one is you can't make someone stop drinking. You cannot make anyone stop drinking. And I want to start here because everything else builds on this. You cannot love them enough to get sober. You cannot love them hard enough, right? You can't reason with them sober. You can't shame them sober. You can't threaten. You can't monitor them sober. You can't throw yourself in front of a bus and sacrifice yourself enough to make another person change. Keyword, is make. You can influence, you can encourage, you can support, you can tell the truth, your truth. You can offer resources and set boundaries, but the willingness to get clean and sober belongs to them. Nobody could get sober for me. Not my husband, not my family, not my nursing license, not my career. Even the consequences. I got a DUI in 2014. I didn't get sober till 2018. Eventually, I had to become willing. And isn't that true for any meaningful change in your life? Nobody can make you lose the weight or make you leave a horrible situation, right? And especially when it comes to addiction, willingness is key here. People change when they become willing to do something different, not when everyone else around them wants it bad enough for them. See, we think if we can want it really bad for other people, that it'll happen. And I'm so sorry. It just doesn't happen that way. And what I hear and what my family said to me was, if you love me, if you care about me, you'll stop. And I think that's one of the most painful things that a family member or loved one or friend can go through. That's a painful thought. If they loved me, they would stop. If they loved their kids, they would stop. If they cared about their children, or if our marriage mattered to my partner, they would stop. And I understand why people think this, but it's not accurate, unfortunately. In fact, I think it causes a tremendous amount of unnecessary pain in families, friends, loved ones, colleagues. Because now you're not only dealing with their drinking and using, you're also carrying the belief that somehow you weren't enough, or you didn't do enough, care enough, love enough, that your being isn't enough for them to stop, right? Your love wasn't enough. Your children weren't enough. And that's a very different conversation. And the reality is, many people who struggle with alcohol deeply love the people around them and their children. That's often what makes this so fucking hard. If love alone could cure addiction, we wouldn't have a problem. But that's unfortunately not the case, right? It's not the way. If love could cure all, spouses would stop, your parents would stop if you're a kid watching your mom or dad, right? People would stop immediately the moment they get a diagnosis, or the moment they get the DUI or the scary lab result, or they face a difficult conversation. But we often see people go on drinking and using long after these things happen. I know I did. You would think a DUI would scare me enough as a nurse, knowing that that was going to go on my nursing license. I mean, you would think for me, I was working in pharmaceuticals at the time. I had a company car. A DUI was going to radically change my life. It took me from the pharmaceutical industry back into bedside care. And yet I did not stop at the DUI because I was not willing to stop. I was not willing to acknowledge that it was at the end of the road. So we see people come up against these horrific consequences and we think, well, this is going to be the moment. But sometimes it isn't. Now, sometimes it is, and that's unfortunately awesome, right? That's a gift wrapped in shit, as they would say. But human behavior is just more complicated than that. Because most people don't drink and use because they don't care. They're using alcohol as a way to manage stress, anxiety, loneliness, right? Perfectionism, overwhelm, grief, boundaries, all the things that we use alcohol and drugs for. What if they've been through a lot of trauma? They have a lot of emotional discomfort. Now, none of this excuses the behavior. People are still responsible for their choices. No, but understanding the problem, it helps us to respond in a more efficient way, because this is a maddening thing to go through on the other side. Their drinking and using is not proof that you don't love them. It is not proof that you are not enough or your kids are not enough. It's a different thing. Psychologically, what they're going through is a different thing, and it's important that we understand that. Now, I think an instinct people have is to control the situation. I know my husband did. He really wanted to control the drinking and driving, the late nights, the hangovers, the missing of the work. And in his efforts to control, it started to turn on him. And I see this all the time, that concern about a human quickly goes to control, right? It starts innocently. We start kind of checking on them. He would smell my breath, check my drinks, check on where I had been, check my location, ask me questions, look at the checking account, dig around my car to find the empties. He thought he was keeping an eye on things. And suddenly, it was like he was monitoring everything in my life, checking the bank statements, following me around. I mean, he was like a private eye. He spent all his hours counting my drinks, looking for evidence that I had relapsed, for bottles, trying to predict what kind of night it was going to be, how I was going to fuck up. And this concern he had and this control became like an obsession. And it was like now my drinking is controlling both of our lives. And that's a place I see a lot of people go because we're scared and we think controlling the situation is how we're going to support them. But it's really not, unfortunately. Support sounds different. It sounds like, honestly, I'm worried about you and I'm here if you want to talk about it. I care about you. I love you. I'm here if you need help. I'm not judging you. But control is different. Control is like, I personally can manage this, right? My husband thought if he was a detective and a soldier and a private eye and a bouncer, he could personally handle all of this. He could fix and prevent. And what most people don't realize when they're trying to help a loved one is they kind of start crossing a line because it happens gradually. And everyone loses. Everyone is exhausted. Everyone feels resentful. And a phrase I commonly use that might seem maddening is, unfortunately, love means you have to let other people voluntarily evolve. I said half with that same cadence of speech I used in my introduction to my podcast, that when I listen to it back, I say, and the science of soul. Every time I listen to that, I want to vomit. Anyway, love means let people voluntarily evolve, right? This is tough, but it's so true because voluntarily means that they're going to take the initiative because they have the willingness to do it. You're not forcing them or manipulating them or guilting them. You're not sitting with them in endless lectures and giving them 27 versions of the same conversation, because that unfortunately isn't going to move the needle. Voluntarily means that their lasting change is ultimately going to come from within, from a willingness within. And it can't be something that you pressure. Now, you can influence it. You can set the boundary. You can even model willingness. I know I did when I quit drinking and my husband didn't. I modeled willingness for 4 years before he finally quit. And it was like the tables had turned. But all I could do is model sobriety, willingness to change, and a better way of living. I couldn't make him stop. I couldn't say, I stop, now you have to stop. That wasn't the way it worked. It just didn't. I quit drinking and my husband went on to drink. Maybe he was half psycho from the years he spent trying to control my drinking. But by the time I quit drinking, my husband was an emotional wreck, and then he started drinking. And then I had to flip the tables and turn and watch him drink. And I could not force him to stop. We had conversations. I told him how I felt. I set a boundary and said, no alcohol in the house. I won't go to the bars with you in early sobriety. And if you come home at 2 a.m. smelling like booze and asshole, then I'm probably not cuddling up to you, right? I set those boundaries as a newly sober woman, but I couldn't make him change. What I'm trying to say is you can invite the willingness from the other human, but you can't manufacture it. It belongs to them, including choices that might hurt them. And that's extremely difficult to watch. I'm not going to mince words here, folks. It's a fucking nightmare to watch. It's going to be the hardest season of your life. Even in mental health, we say commonly people have the right to make bad decisions. That is, when they are discharged back into the community, they have the right to live unhoused. They have the right to avoid going to the doctor, seeking shelter, getting the right meals. They even sadly have the right to return to using and drinking if they want to. People have the right to make bad decisions. We cannot lord over people's lives. And it's really hard in a mental health setting or in a personal life setting to watch the loved one that you care about destroy themselves, whether it's alcohol or food or shopping or whatever it is. It's really hard. But the advice I give people is not to abandon them, but don't abandon yourself either. And this is really important. Sometimes I think recovery culture swings too far in either direction. And one extreme could be like you want to rescue. And the other extreme is some therapists, some sobriety coaches or programs will say, you got to cut that person off. But that's just not the way life lives in the gray area. Life lives somewhere in the nuance and in the middle. When I was drinking heavily, my husband went to a therapist who point blank looked at him and said, you have to leave her, you have to cut her off, and never speak to her again. And if she wants to quit drinking, that's on her. But you've got to leave the relationship. And that wasn't an option for my husband because emotionally he couldn't just say, I'm just going to leave my wife. I mean, thank God he felt too much love and concern to just walk away. But that was the advice. Tough love was the advice he was given. There's some truth to that, yes, but that's not the only way, especially where the heart is concerned. Remember that thing we have that's heart and feelings and mushy? And my husband was looking at his wife and thinking, I can't leave her like this. I won't leave her like this. I refuse. I'm going to stay and fight. And I'm forever grateful for that. But yes, he got the advice to pack his shit and get out or kick me out. He did ask me to leave the house for a while, and I went and stayed at my parents' beach house. And that's because there were kids involved. He did not ask for a divorce, but he knew during the darkest times, children should not bear witness to this crap, this buffoonery. Okay, back to what I'm saying. Life is somewhere in the middle, right? I don't think that when you're struggling, you need to be excommunicated from your family. I don't believe shame and isolating people are effective teachers. Shaming people doesn't help anything. And to that argument, the first thing instinctually we want to do when someone is really going through it is like, get the F away, right? We cut off friends. We exclude them from the group chat. We want to get them out of our lives. We don't invite them to the party. But then I always go back to that TED talk that Johan Hari did when I was in early recovery. And that was the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety. It's connection. So it leads me into the argument that shaming, cutting off, and isolating people aren't particularly effective teachers. There's so much nuance here. Connecting with that person doesn't mean tolerating everything they do. You can love someone and still tell them the truth. You can answer the phone without rescuing them. In a sense, you can care without carrying it. And the reason I say this is not about parents of teenagers in addiction is because I feel like that's the fucking stupidest thing to say to a mama bear. You can care without carrying it. Hello, that's your spawn. That's your baby, your DNA. I don't think I could sit here as a woman and say, you can care without carrying it. I think every mother out there would say, fuck all the way off. I will carry it. And that's okay too. And I'm not going to offer you advice on how to handle that as a parent. I'm saying adult to adult. You can say, I love you. I see you. And this situation has to change for me to stay involved in your life in the same way. And that's not a punishment. That's just you being honest. Because boundaries that you set are about you yourself. It's not about another person at this point. A boundary is not something you are going to make someone do. A boundary is something you do, you have for yourself. So example might be, I'm not going to loan you money anymore. We have a family member that calls all the time asking for money because we know he needs a hit on the street. I'm not going to loan you money. I'll buy you a pair of shoes. If you say you need shoes and you're out there on the streets, I'll buy them for you. I'll buy you a meal, but I won't give you money. Or a colleague, I'm not going to cover for you at work anymore. I'm just not. I won't lie for you. Or I won't ride in the car with you, but you've been drinking. Like I said with my husband, don't bring it to the house. I won't go to the bars with you. I won't stay in conversations that become abusive when you're drinking. You notice the difference here? The focus isn't to control them. It's deciding what you will participate in. Because when you're setting a healthy boundary, it's not about punishing the other person. It's about making sure there's self-respect. And that's incredibly important. Because it is very, very easy to go down the rabbit hole with another loved one when you are trying to help them and get so sucked in to their problems and become so codependent, and that your life revolves around, are they drinking today or using today? Are they not? Did I find a bottle? Did they relapse? Watching them. Hypervigilance, obsessing. It's really easy for people to sit back and become so engrossed in their partner's behavior that they forget to take care of themselves. I watched a family member do it, forgot to worry about whether she was getting enough exercise or she was eating healthy. And the only thing she would talk about is her partner's drinking. Now, on the side of it, from a healthy individual, I can clearly see that this person is losing themselves. They're getting sucked down the codependency rabbit hole. That does not make them bad or weak. That's just what's happening. And it happens to a lot of people. So I'm here to say a healthy boundary is where you're going to establish your own self-respect and preservation here. But I would highly encourage the narrative in your house, in your life, not to be, I have this friend, this loved one that's fucked up. Like, I don't want family members or loved ones or friends to view the person struggling with addiction as broken. And this might surprise some people, but I don't really think of a drinking or drug problem as evidence that someone is fucked up. I see it as a maladaptive coping strategy, an ineffective solution to the real problem. And that's because I understand the science around it. Most people are trying to soothe something. Loneliness, stress, heartbreak, boredom, shame, emotional discomfort, the list goes on. And alcohol or drugs are simply the tool that they are using. And if we are honest with ourselves, a lot of us have some kind of version of this. Now, here's where we talk about judgment. I don't think it's helpful when a family member sits back in judgment of a loved one that's drinking too much. Well, look at them. They just can't stop drinking. I can have a few glasses and put it down, but they can't. Judging that person, not helpful. Because here's what, many, many people have a version of something that they use to cope. I see people overeat, overshop, overwork, post on social media every single day, every move they're making, look at me, attention, live on social media. Meanwhile, they're overweight, they're shopping too much. Now, they might not be drinking too much, but right, you can clearly see there's another coping strategy there. And to sit in judgment of a person who uses drugs or alcohol as their coping strategy when we all have these strategies. That's not helpful. Some people use dieting and exercise as a coping strategy, and they go above and beyond, or they're seeking approval or achievement, workaholism, people pleasing. Sometimes the drug of choice is a little sexier, a diet influencer, wellness guru. That's a little sexier than someone who drinks from a box of wine. But you get my point. We're all kind of falling under the same coping mechanisms. We're all trying to regulate ourselves somehow. Now, I'm not saying these coping strategies are equally harmful, right? I still to this day probably shop too much, eat too many carbs, scroll on social media. They're not, but I'm not drinking, right? I'm not using any drugs. These are not equally harmful. I'm just hoping that you look at your own life and you can see yourself in some of these areas. The human nature that we all have to self-soothe. I'll never forget in early sobriety, I came across a meme that said, those same people that judge you for not being able to stop drinking are also the people who can't say no to the bread basket at dinner. And I remember thinking, yeah, I'm a rock star at saying no to the bread basket. Like, nope, I don't want the bread. I don't want the carb. I don't want to fill up on meaningless food when I've got a great meal coming. But I have had meals with other people who, no matter how much they tell themselves they're on the keto, they can't help but having some fresh, warm bread. See, it just made me laugh. Again, those are not equally harmful. Or maybe, I guess, if you're going to die of a heart attack or whatever, but you get my point. Look at the humanity in the struggle is what I'm hoping that you see. Because struggle is something we all do. This does not make you defective as a human. This is how we cope and self-soothe. It is very natural. Addiction doesn't make people really all that different. It's a very normal thing for humans to self-soothe. And also humanizing this whole thing helps create the safety that this person in your life might need to change. They might need you to put down the judgment for a minute. Stop drinking the haterade for just a minute. Recognize the humanity in it. That's what they might need to hear, is we all struggle. I get it. You've been through some hard shit. You're using this to cope, but it's not working. That's a much more honest conversation. People know they drink too much already. You're not telling them things they don't know. Often what they don't know is where to go. So lecturing people on drinking alcohol and all the harmful effects, probably not helpful. I was a registered nurse of 17 years by the time I got sober. I basically understood how alcohol impacts the vital organs. I did not need someone to sit and tell me over and over that it was going to kill me or contribute to cancer or my rotting teeth or my bloated face. I knew that. And there's this little thing called ChatGPT now. We don't need someone to give us the rundown or send us articles on the harmful effects. All fine if you do that, but I highly, highly doubt this is an information problem. In this day and age, unless your loved one is living under a rock, well, could be if they're drinking too much, but you get what I said. It's not an information problem. What people often don't know, and or maybe they haven't had the courage to search for, or they feel ashamed or scared of, is where to go. You're not going to become their therapist, but you could become their connector. You could do some research. It's not like the old days when the only place to go was AA or NA. There are multitude of resources online, groups you can attend for free, all women groups, Dharma recovery, religious recovery, atheist recovery, smart recovery. There's coaches, there's podcasts, there's groups that talk about mommying and wifing and book club, and there's sober golf, sober sports, sober travel. You get my point. It's a different landscape out there than it used to be. So do some research for your loved one. Don't just go on and on about what a piece of shit they are. Maybe say, what could be helpful is Here's a group of professionals. They meet online. It's totally anonymous and it's $20 a month. Maybe talk to them because I don't understand. Maybe talk to them about what you're going through. Send them a link to an online resource. It's worth checking out. God, I remember when I was trying to get sober or contemplating getting sober, the research was abysmal. The internet was there, but it wasn't as big on social media. So it was really like SAMHSA and AA were the only things, a crisis line. I'm not doing that. I could have used some website or some mommy blog place to go to that was a little bit less threatening. And what I'm saying is it's all out there. And I think a lot of people don't realize that providing someone with a third door, here, try this, have a conversation here, that might be helpful. The other thing is the majority of sober coaches, recovery coaches, will happily do a free discovery call with your loved one. Now, I personally only coach women. So when someone tries to send their husband or brother to me, I will send them to another male recovery coach. But hearing from somebody who's actually lived it, it lands differently. Now, I am also trained in addiction, but I have lived experience, and that's going to land a lot different for someone than you sitting there talking about how they need to quit drinking when you yourself have never struggled, especially if you can't put down the breadbasket, honey. I mean, look at yourself a little too here. Are you perfect? Have you ever been able to quit all the things, stick on your diet, stick to a budget? It's not that easy. So talking to the right people who've been there, there's a multitude of resources out there because you don't have to have all the answers as the loved one. You're not going to overnight become an addiction therapist, but sometimes the role is really just helping your loved one have the right conversation with the right people. That can really be impactful. I remember the first time I came across an addiction therapist that had all these tools. And instead of lecturing me and going on and on about the damage that alcohol's doing, she really just said, I get it. And she told me her story of struggling. And that's what I needed, is someone just to be honest with me and frank and quit judging me. Quit trying to control the narrative, control the situation. And I think, looking back and now that I'm on the other side of it, that's a professional move on her part because I had my guard up so high, like I wasn't talking to anybody. And so she came in really non-confrontational and was just like, hey, I've been there. You can't stop drinking? Okay. Well, what are you going to do about it? I couldn't. And here's what happened. The conversation was different. At one point, she was even like, let's go outside and have a cigarette together. Like, what are we doing in this stuffy office? And I remember thinking, okay, now we're talking. This is a down-ass chick who actually gets it. She's not going to go on and on about psychological brain change. She's just going to tell me her story and say she understands. But mostly I felt seen and heard and not judged. And she was one of the first people I came across after going to multiple therapists and having a family intervention and all these things. I felt so cornered and triggered and caged and like everyone was focused on me. And I felt so defensive that I did not need another intervention. I didn't need anyone to gang up on me and tell me what a piece of shit I was because I already knew. What I needed was for someone to just keep it real with me and tell me they had been there too and they see me and that I could get through this. And her point was coming from a healthcare provider perspective of I was the addict and now I am the caregiver. And that kind of flipped a switch in my head of, oh, I'm a nurse. If I get sober, I could maybe focus on mental health and help other people. Now, that's just my own personal story, but it flipped a switch somewhere in there that it's not all lost. It's not all gone. I'm worth saving, right? Okay. So the other thing I want to bring up here is people ask me about Codependence Anonymous because there is an element of codependency here. So I'm going to talk about this. And my answer is going to be similar to that I have in a lot of recovery spaces. Codependence Anonymous is for people who are having loved ones struggle. It's called CODA for short. Some people find it incredibly helpful. You're going to work the steps with a sponsor, and it looks something like, my life has become unmanageable over their drinking and I'm powerless over their drinking. Some iteration of the steps, except for the verb is changed. Like I said, some people love it. I think it depends also on where you live. If you have a large meeting around you of like-minded people, that might be helpful, just like AA. If you lived in a giant city and there was a variety of meetings and different people and faces, it might be more helpful than if you live in a small town. Recovery for me was limited because I live in a fairly small community. Regardless, the biggest value for people in these spaces is learning the difference between helping someone and controlling someone. And you can learn that in Codependence Anonymous. You can learn it from a book. You can learn it from a counselor. But you really have to learn where your responsibility ends and someone else's begins. And that's what they're going to focus on in CODA, any type of codependency teaching, and how really you might be making the situation worse because you're trying to control and you're going down the rabbit hole with them. So that's kind of my take on those types of meetings. Now, theoretically, the support is great. I think anybody who is going through something that they cannot control, they're watching a loved one go through something, it's helpful to talk to someone trained in codependency, because often codependency is not what we think it is. Go back to the episode I recorded with Dr. Sarah Michaud on codependency. It's pretty eye-opening. So kind of summarizing everything I've been talking about. You cannot make someone quit drinking, drugging, eating, shopping, gambling, cheating. You cannot make them. And it is a fool's errand to try. They have to be willing. And that sucks. And that's hard. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. All you can do is set healthy boundaries to protect yourself from going down the rabbit hole. You can offer support and love, offer resources, be non-judgmental. For God's sake, don't gang up on them and don't shame them. It doesn't help. Look in the mirror. You're not perfect. We're all addicted to shit. The book's called Dopamine Nation and not Dopamine Community for a reason. It's the whole nation. I've said this on other podcasts. Anyway, we're all struggling. We're all human. Normalize the experience, but protect yourself from going down that rabbit hole. And especially if you yourself are newly sober or struggling to stay sober and you have a person in your life that isn't quite there yet. The first thing you have to do is take care of yourself. You cannot go down that rabbit hole with that person. And I know that's easier said than done. I'm not saying you have to cut people out of your lives. What I'm saying is to make your own sobriety a priority is to not get super sucked into other people's mess, because there are specialists and coaches and groups for that. There's resources of trained individuals who can help with that. You yourself, because you got sober, you don't have to instantly become an addiction therapist. Send them to someone who's been there. So if you take things away from this episode, let it be this. None of this person's drinking or using is a reflection of your worth. You don't have to rescue, but you also don't have to abandon. You don't have to carry, and you don't have to lose yourself trying to save them. Love them. Don't judge them. Tell the truth. Offer support. Provide resources. But protect yourself. And remember, you can care extremely deeply about someone else without carrying them on your back. An adult, not so sure for children, is a different thing. And so many of these healthy boundaries do not mean you've given up on the person. There's a dignity in allowing someone to make their own choices here. Like I said, love means let others voluntarily evolve. There's a dignity here. And sometimes letting them make their own choice is the most loving thing that you can do. And I hope this was helpful. Send it to a person who needs to hear this. I didn't cover everything in exhaustion, but I think I covered the most important things. All right, that's what I got for you today. If this hits, send it to a woman who needs to hear this shit, because we are not doing this alone. You can find me on Instagram and pretty much all the socials at Rewired Sober. The links are in my show notes if you want to work with me one-on-one and go deeper. I love you, mean it, take care of yourself, and I'll catch you on the next one.